I think both sides are trying to position themselves for negotiation. I think both sides are trying to use this as a leverage tactic, but I don't see a real threat of war between the United States and Russia anytime soon.
And Russia says it could once again deploy short and intermediate range nuclear weapons. It's yet another story that sends a shiver down the spine following the news that Donald Trump said he was deploying 2 nuclear submarines to combat Russian threats. All this is happening as President Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff prepares to fly to Moscow for talks. Let's try and understand the significance of the Russian move. William Alberque is a former director of NATO's Arms Control, Disarmament and WMD Non-Proliferation Centre. William, good morning to you.
Good morning.
How significant is this movement, this deployment of these type of nuclear weapons?
Well, from what we know from observation, both open source and intelligence sources, Russia began deploying these missiles years ago. You'll remember when the Russians started to violate the INF Treaty, this was a specific missile, the 9M729. It's a ground-launched cruise missile. The Russians began testing it in the early 2010s. They began deploying it around 2017. And the U.S. tried to talk to the Russians, talk them out of deploying these weapons. They did so anyway, and under the Obama administration, tried to negotiate out, threatened to deploy U.S. missiles as sort of a countermeasure if Russia didn't stop, but ended up under the Trump administration just withdrawing from the treaty entirely. So this is something that's been in the mail for a long time. Now, Putin claimed that he was having what he called a moratorium of deployment. Now, when he said moratorium, we got confused because it sounded like you're in the middle of deploying it and now you're going to stop deploying them. Yeah. But we saw that they were deploying them. So this moratorium was nonsense. We think the missiles are there anyway. This is a way of Putin, he basically what he's going to do is he's going to declare new deployments that have been there for a long time. Okay. So it's a regrettable development, but it's not an unexpected one.
And are these what we hear when we talk about tactical nuclear weapons? These are weapons they are nuclear but could be used on the battlefield.
Right. I wouldn't call them tactical so much. Tactical means more the really, really close battlefield. These are intended to strike targets deep in NATO's areas, like seaports and airports. Okay. So basically what Russia wants to do is they want to be able to drop nuclear weapons on the places where the U.S. would want to reinforce Europe if Russia attacked, to be able to cut the United States off from supporting Europe in case of war.
And so Donald Trump moving nuclear submarines, we hear about these nuclear weapons as well. How worried should we be? Because most of us normal people hear nuclear weapons being moved by, let's be honest, 2 quite unstable men. It feels a bit frightening. How frightened should we be?
I would moderate my fear. Basically, Vladimir Putin likes to use nuclear threats to try to intimidate people. We know that Trump, remember from the first administration, used to threaten fire on North Korea as well. But in the end, they end up not using them. I think both sides are trying to position themselves for negotiation. I think both sides are trying to use this as a leverage tactic. But I don't see a real threat of war between the United States and Russia anytime soon.
Steve Witkoff is visiting Moscow tomorrow, I think. There's a Russian tabloid recently wrote this line: the Trump locomotive and the Putin locomotive are speeding towards each other and neither is about to turn off or stop and reverse. Does that feel like an accurate situation? Steve Witkoff is going to Moscow, but there's not that much hope that he'll be able to produce something.
Honestly, I think there is ground for the United States and Russia to have some arms control talks. I think both sides have a real interest in some kind of thing to follow on the New START treaty, so that there's not an unlimited nuclear arms race. I think Trump has been speaking about this for decades. He volunteered at one point to negotiate with the Russians, I think, for Reagan. So I think there is some interest there in arms control. We'll see what they can come to. Ukraine's going to be a big sticking point, and I hope Trump is unwilling to give up on that. But Putin, you're right. He's a very, very stubborn person, and he wants leverage to try to keep the United States out of Europe, to try to get an upper hand. So it could end up with absolutely nothing, but I'm glad they're at least going to try to talk.
Trump's threat of sanctions on Russia and providing weapons to Ukraine, selling them to NATO countries, comes into force at the end of this week. I think it's the 8th of August. I guess the question for all of us, and you're not going to know Donald Trump's mind better than anyone else, I guess, but The question is, will Trump enforce that threat on the 8th of August and say, no deal has been done, we're coming after you with sanctions, we're selling weapons to Ukraine?
I think he probably will do that. I think just the way that Trump and Putin are positioned right now, I think we're going to have to go through a couple more rounds of talks. And I think Putin is going to try to test Trump's willingness to come through for Ukraine. I think the interests, I think the NATO Secretary General played a blinder in how he really positioned Trump in this way, because Putin's not going to back down. Trump's going to sell the arms. That's going to increase American leverage so that it makes talks even more likely to succeed, I think, in the future. It's just going to be, it's rough. It's going to go back and forth. But I do think, again, both sides have an interest here in some kind of arms control agreement. It's not going to happen now, but in a few months down the road, after the U.S. has delivered for Ukraine, I think Putin will be in a much more willing position to have to negotiate with the United States on these topics.
You think that NATO conference, which we were at, was critical, actually, do you think, William? The idea of, Rutte calling him daddy and the way the whole thing was built around flattering Trump and making Trump legitimately seem like the big man in the room, which of course he was. Do you think that was actually a critical moment we'll look back and that was a critical moment in all of this? This was the moment where Trump, who'd been pretty anti-NATO, came on board to a certain extent at the expense of Russia.
If Trump delivers with the weapons in August, in a few days, August 8th, then I think it will be seen as a critical moment for the alliance. We have to remember, Trump was threatening to withdraw from NATO altogether. And a lot of people thought if he came back from a second term, that was exactly what he was going to do. And instead, there he was playing a central role at a NATO conference, comes out praising NATO. This is something that I didn't expect. So yes, I think if he delivers for Ukraine in a couple of days, then people will look back and say that the NATO Secretary General Rutte, who was set up so well by Stoltenberg for this position, really delivered on, kind of a strange performance. But if it works, then bless him, it worked.
Yeah, if it works, it works. That's the question, isn't it? Really, really interesting stuff. Great to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That's William Alberque there, former director of NATO's Arms Control Disarmament and WMD Non-Proliferation Centre. Lots of scary talk about nuclear weapons. It's good to speak to an expert to work out. As ever, so much of this is posturing. But the more we have this conversation this morning, Kate, to a certain extent, the posturing has to stop on the 8th of August, doesn't it? Or a version of this posturing has to stop on the 8th of August. So either Trump is going to make these weapons available and sanction Russia, or he's not.
I think he'll definitely make the weapons available. I think the bigger question is, what does he say on the 8th of August to get himself out of a position which he doesn't really want to be in? I was speaking to somebody yesterday who said Donald Trump talking about moving his nuclear submarines or his nuclear sort of capabilities around, it almost doesn't really mean anything because they constantly move around the world and they are almost always within range of a country like Russia. So it's just a bit of public posturing at a time when the two men are definitely locked in this war of words. I think the Steve Witkoff visit will be really interesting. We'll cover that tomorrow when he's there to see if, how he's received, what the kind of noises are around that visit. Unlikely to really secure anything. But the fact that it's happening at all and the fact that it's happening this week when that deadline is approaching, I think will be really interesting.
And we're so used to the banding around of tariffs, aren't we, with Trump? But the sanctions on Russia, whether they're actually effective or not, the idea of him taking on Putin, actually saying, because this is what the war of words around Ukraine has been for so long, where he's come just short of criticising Putin. He's got closer and closer and closer, hasn't he, in previous weeks. But if he finally comes out and says Putin has screwed this up, he's not wanting peace, we're coming after him in whatever forum, that will be a moment, won't it?
Yeah, it would be a huge moment.